So today's video is pretty special to me. During my latest project where I created Minecraft in VRChat, I decided to record all of the 60 hours of work that went into the project. This turned out to be exactly 1 week in development time. When I saw this, I just knew that I had to compile all of these recordings into a single video. Back in 2013, the creator Legend of Link created a video called Minecraft in Unity 3D, the 1 week programming challenge. Back in 2013, when I first saw this video, I remember being fascinated seeing him approach the problem and creating the entire game within a week, even though I did not know how to program myself. Now, over 7 years later, I have created a similar project myself within the same time frame, which I thought had a very poetic beauty to it, which is why I wanted to pay homage to his video today. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the video of how I created Minecraft in VRChat in 1 week. Be advised that this video contains flashing images, so if you suffer from epilepsy, please stop watching now. First things first, I set up a new Unity project and download the VRChat SDK and add it to my Unity project. I also download Udon Sharp, which is a special Udon compiler which allows you to write regular C# code instead of using the Udon graph editor. I follow the step-by-step guide provided in the VRChat documentation on how to set up your Unity project with the VRChat SDK. Then I build a very basic world with just a floor and make sure that it starts up in VRChat okay before I get to the actual programming. The first programming thing I did was trying to generate a two-dimensional mesh from just block faces. This approach would be far more efficient than building the entire Minecraft world from 3D cube game objects. The downside of this is that I had never built meshes from just 3D points in space before, so I ran into multiple problems trying to map these 3D points in space into a one-dimensional array. You can see this manifest itself in the video as weird long lines of 3D points in space connecting to the wrong other 3D points in space. I eventually managed to fix this by fixing the offset of where I store these 3D points in space in the one-dimensional array. When I finally got this two-dimensional floor of cubes generating properly, I added the third dimension. When doing this, I ran into even more issues, though after a lot of trial and error finally managed to get everything working properly so that you could have a single game object which contained an area of 16 by 16 by 16 blocks. On the second day, I made sure that the mesh was still generating properly, as well as testing if it worked with textures. When this all seemed fine, I also made sure that I could remove blocks from the mesh and have it regenerate properly. When this also seemed fine, I added a 3-dimensional jagged array for storing all of the block types in the chunk. This did take me a while, because I was not familiar with which array types Udon Sharp supported. When the array of blocks was finally working properly, I started work on generating multiple chunks in the world. This was relatively easy and did not cause any major issues. When all the chunk related stuff was working well, I decided to start work on adding more textures to the game. By a complete accident, I found a great texture on the Minecraft wiki. My intention was to have only a single material on each chunk, which held all of the block textures. This way I could save massively on draw calls and would only have to align the UVs with each specific block face. Though I realized pretty quickly that aligning the UVs was gonna be pretty difficult if the texture file was not completely square. So I took the texture into a photo editing software and tried to make it as square as possible. A lot of math, trial and error later, I finally managed to get the UVs aligning properly for a block. So with all of the right numbers in hand, I went into the code and implemented the UV alignment. This did take me a second because I was having some issues with the rounding of numbers, but eventually I managed to get everything to work. Then, after fixing some lighting and also the transparency of the texture, I thought it was pretty much good to go. I still had some time left, so I decided to see how far I could get with getting some terrain generation to work. Turns out pretty far. After adding some basic block types, such as stone, dirt and grass being particularly difficult because I was having some issues getting the side texture of the block to show in the proper rotation. After I got that working though, I took some purlin noise and made some simple rolling hills, with the correct layering of grass, dirt and stone, which was the end of day 2. On day 3, I mostly spent my time improving performance and fixing bugs. One of the biggest issues I addressed is the fact that Udon scripts are effectively single-threaded, which means that any kind of code that is being executed will temporarily freeze the user's game. This can be an annoying, or at worst, sickening experience for any VR users. This is why it was important to optimize the code as much as possible. Unfortunately, generating a large amount of meshes is inherently a computationally expensive operation, which is worsened by the fact that Udon Sharp is about 100 times slower than regular C#. This is why I ultimately decided to only render a single chunk per frame instead of all chunks at once, allowing for a much more pleasant user experience while the world is loading. I also discovered that accessing components across game objects was prohibitively slow in Udon Sharp, which is why I decided to have a more monolithic file structure for the final world. Making this change in architecture, as well as profiling the performance of the new implementation and fixing any bugs, took me the rest of the day. On day 4, I started the day by fixing holes where chunks met. This turned out to be pretty easy with the new monolithic file architecture. After that, I started work on the scripts that would enable the manual placing and removing of blocks. Thanks to good script design and comprehensive public functions, I was able to get this to work in only a few minutes. Finally, it was time to test the world in VRChat for the first time, and thankfully everything was running pretty well. With all of the terrain generation stuff finally out of the way, I could start working on an inventory system and the actual player experience. I started by blocking out a basic pickaxe and testing it in-game. When this felt right, I replaced it with an actual diamond pickaxe model, and I also added a basic block placing item. With this single player version of the world working and playing well, I decided to end the day. At the start of day 5, I spent some time redoing the terrain generation system, mostly to improve speed. This implementation would also give me more flexibility when testing in the future. After this, I had to decide which version of Minecraft I was going to replicate. After some looking around, Minecraft Classic seemed to be the obvious choice. With its limited amount of blocks and no infinite terrain generation, I thought this was a reasonable target. So I then added all of the blocks that were available in Minecraft Classic, plus some extra ones that I liked. When these were all working, I then proceeded to add the classic Minecraft trees to the terrain generation. As it turns out, it's pretty difficult to define these trees with math, so I ended up hard-coding quite a few of the block locations. To finish off the day, I decided to add a slider with which players could choose which block to place, though at the end of the week I decided to replace this with an actual block selection menu. On day 6 I started by fixing the collider on the slider. Apparently the collider is solid by default, so in order to remedy this you need to add your own box collider and set it to a trigger. After this was done, it was finally time to add some networking. Udon is pretty picky when it comes to synchronizing data between clients. For my first try I had the block position and block type as synced variables. This ended up being a pretty poor solution because in Udon there is no guarantee that network events are handled in order. Also, only having a single set of synced variables for all players to share meant that a lot of block changes were not being synchronized properly. I tried to fix this by adding more synchronized variables, but this was ultimately not a scalable solution. I ended up rewriting a lot of this networking code on the final day. I finished off the day by uploading a private version of the world to VRChat so that I could test it with some actual people. During the final day, I spent most of my time improving the networking code as well as adding a block selection menu. Instead of relying on multiple synced variables, I decided to pack all of the changed block data into a single string. This way I would not have to worry about a changed block not synchronizing properly. I wanted to take a second to show you the final networking code because I think it's pretty great. By using the on pre-serialization and on deserialization functions provided by Udon Sharp, you can just let Udon Sharp handle all of the detection when a synced variable is being sent or received. Then I also used base64 strings to pack the byte data as efficiently as possible. My favorite part of this implementation though is that each player can have their own synchronized block game object to talk to, so you have zero risk of any race conditions from happening. The way I managed to do this was with this function. It relies on the premise that player IDs always only go up by 1 in VRChat, and that if a player disconnects, getting the player by that ID returns a null. Because of this, you can crunch all of the player objects into a sorted array and guarantee that every connected player will have their own game object to talk to. And that's how I created Minecraft in VRChat in just 1 week. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you'll get to try the world as well. But for everybody who made it to the end, I have included a 1-minute clip of gameplay for you to enjoy. Please consider subscribing if you haven't yet, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!